So picture the scene for a second. It's dawn, right? Out in the Mexican desert.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and there's a man standing there, and he's absolutely terrified. He's completely alone in this vast, desolate wasteland of, like, scrub and water barrel cacti.
Sounds incredibly bleak.
It is. And he's barefoot, which just adds to the vulnerability. But the thing is, he's waiting.
Waiting for what?
He's waiting for something that his teacher calls an ally.
Oh, right.
Yeah, this strange, towering, hollow-eyed spirit entity. And it's dressed in this dark jacket and patent leather boots, of all things.
Which is such a bizarrely specific detail for a spirit.
Exactly. And so as this terrifying figure starts walking toward him, really digging those heavy boots into the sand, suddenly this single crow wheels across the pale sky above them.
Okay.
And instantly the man just jolts awake.
Oh, wow.
He is drenched in a cold sweat, staring wildly at the ceiling of his bedroom in Westwood, Los Angeles.
So it's a dream. I mean, that is the absolute definition of a waking nightmare. It's basically the climax of a 12-year spiritual quest, frozen right at this precipice of madness.
Right, and the crazy thing is, this wasn't just some random bad dream he had once. This was the recurring, haunting nightmare of Carlos Castaneda.
A name I'm sure pretty much everyone listening has heard at least once.
Oh, for sure. If you're listening, you probably have this guy's name rattling around in your head. Maybe you even had a dog-eared copy of his book sitting on your shelf, or, your parents did.
Yeah, especially if you were anywhere near a college campus in the late 60s and 70s.
Exactly. I mean, bookstores, the whole counterculture movement, Carlos Castaneda was just inescapable. He was one of the most famous and honestly most enigmatic and controversial authors of the 20th century.
Without a doubt.
He sold millions of books detailing this mind-bending apprenticeship he supposedly had with a Yaqui Indian sorcerer named Don Juan Matus.
And those books, I mean, they didn't just sell well. They completely shattered how an entire generation viewed reality. They taught anthropology, spirituality. They were an absolute cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
Because they basically promised that magic was real.
Right.
And not just real, but accessible.
Yeah.
Like just across the border, you could find real magic.
But, and this is where our deep dive today comes in, what if those profound spiritual truths that changed all those millions of lives, what if they were actually just elaborate defense mechanisms?
That's the big question.
Right. Like, what if they were designed by a really terrified man just to hide his own deep-seated insecurities?
It's a fascinating angle to look at.
So today, for you listening, we are going on a deep dive into an incredibly rare perspective on this icon. We've got this memoir titled A Magical Journey with Carlos Castaneda.
And it was written by Margaret Runyan Castaneda.
Yes, his former wife, which is wild. So our mission here is to strip away the intense mythology surrounding this sort of cult leader and really look at the flesh and blood man behind the curtain.
And we really have to look at everything to get the full picture.
Yeah, we're looking at intimate biographical details, the historical context of 1950s Los Angeles, the deep roots of indigenous Peruvian drug rituals, and honestly, the absolutely bizarre psychological games played between a husband and wife.
I mean, the sheer breadth of the material we have to sift through is astonishing.
It really is.
Because to understand Carlos, you can't just look at his time in the desert.
Yeah.
You really have to look at how he built his reality from the ground up.
Using like a bit of everything.
Exactly. Utilizing everything from ancient ethnobotany to modern sociology.
Well, it's a wild ride. And to kick it off, it actually all starts not in the remote deserts of Sonora, but in a pretty standard Los Angeles apartment in December of 1955.
Which is such a contrast.
Totally. It's this classic meet cute, but it's infused with a very heavy dose of the occult right from the jump. So Margaret is at her apartment getting ready for the holiday season,
Right.
And she's trying on these beautiful, highly structured custom cocktail dresses. They were actually made by the mother of her friend, Lidette Maduro.
Oh, the clothing detail here is great.
I think the clothing actually sets the scene perfectly for the era. We have this description from the source. One dress is the stunning blue pot de soie with a dropped waistline, a chantilly lace fitted top, and like rhinestone straps.
Yeah.
And the other is a mandarin silk brocade with Chinese motifs.
You know, the detail of the pot de soie is actually quite telling if you think about it.
How so?
Well, for those who don't know, pot de soie is this very heavy, stiff silk fabric. It holds its shape really rigidly.
Okay. Right.
It's basically the epitome of 1950s formal, constrained fashion. It represents this whole world of rules, social expectations, and really manicured appearances.
That makes total sense.
And this is the world Margaret is inhabiting when the door opens. And in walks just the complete antithesis of that rigid world.
Right, because Lydette walks in with a friend, and it's Carlos.
Yes.
And he completely shatters the social etiquette of the room immediately.
Just right off the bat.
He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't say a single word. He just walks in, goes straight to the corner of the room, sits down, and just stares at her.
Which is so intense.
Extremely. He's described as this short, dark-haired man with these large, deep brown eyes, and he just sits there in absolute heavy silence, and she's just standing there in this stiff silk dress.
It's so awkward. But his behavior here really dictates the entire future dynamic of their relationship.
Oh, for sure.
Because as they are leaving, Carlos gives Margaret this overwhelming, silent look. A look that she later writes made her head physically pound.
Which is, I mean, that's a visceral reaction.
It really is. And right after they step outside, Lydette turns to Margaret and issues this very specific, chilling warning about Carlos.
Right, she says something like, beware of him.
Exactly. She says, beware of him. He can charm your soul. He is a curandero, a shaman, a magician.
That is a wildly heavy thing to drop on someone who is literally just checking the fit of a cocktail dress in the mirror.
Seriously.
I assume Margaret was pretty taken aback by this. I mean, most people in 1955 Los Angeles would probably think, okay, keep that weird guy away from me, please.
You would think so, right? But you have to look at the pre-existing dynamic of Margaret's life.
Right, she wasn't exactly a skeptic.
Exactly. She isn't this innocent, blank slate bystander. She is already deeply immersed in mysticism before Carlos even enters the picture.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Margaret is an avid follower of a mystic named Neville Goddard.
Ah, Neville Goddard.
Yeah, Goddard was a prominent figure in the New Thought movement. And he essentially preached that human imagination is the true reality.
So she doesn't just, like, wait around for this silent, mysterious guy to call her. She actively decides to force the issue using her own belief system.
She absolutely does.
Because a few days later, she goes over to Lydette's house, knowing Carlos might be hanging around there, and she slips him a book.
Right, Goddard's book.
Yeah, a copy of Goddard's book, The Search, and she writes her name and phone number on the inside cover.
But he doesn't call. He just vanishes for 6 months.
6 months. That is an eternity.
It really is.
Most people would just write it off as a completely misconnection and move on. But Margaret, she turns to Neville Goddard's teachings. She utilizes this very specific technique that Goddard taught called controlled imagination.
Yes, controlled imagination.
And as I understand it, this is the idea that if you vividly imagine a goal right before you fall asleep, like if you feel it, smell it, internalize it as a physical reality in that sort of twilight state between waking and sleeping, your subconscious will somehow force it to manifest in the physical world.
That is the core of Goddard's philosophy. It entirely relies on the assumption that the physical world is malleable to a disciplined human mind.
Okay.
So every single night, Margaret visualizes Carlos's face. She sends out this relentless silent command into the ether, just repeating, "Call me."
Wow.
And then 6 months later, at exactly 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, her phone rings. And it's Carlos.
See, I look at this controlled imagination practice and my mind instantly goes to modern algorithmic trends. This sounds exactly like the manifestation and lucky girl syndrome trends you see all over TikTok today.
It really does.
You know, millions of people visualizing a text from their ex or a job offer, genuinely believing their brainwaves are altering reality.
Yeah, trying to force the universe's hand.
Right. And I have to wonder if this was a case of genuine, unexplainable, mystical connection, or just two highly imaginative people projecting their own deep desires onto a blank slate.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
Because frankly, sitting silently in a corner doesn't necessarily mean you're a shaman. It could just mean you're terrified of talking to women at parties.
That is a brilliant deduction, and it gets to the absolute core tension of their entire relationship, and honestly, Carlos's entire life.
Yeah.
Because we know from biographical sources that Carlos was incredibly insecure.
Oh, really?
Yes. He was 5'5", deeply self-conscious about his height, and he had a very pronounced South American accent that he felt made him an outsider in America.
So the silence was a cover.
Exactly. His intense silence, those long, mysterious stares, They weren't ancient shamanic techniques. They were desperate defense mechanisms.
Wow.
They were designed to project an aura of mystery, to perfectly mask his crippling shyness and social anxiety.
So Margaret wanted a mystic, so she interpreted his social anxiety as this profound spiritual silence.
Yes.
And Carlos desperately wanted to be seen as special, so he eagerly leaned into her projection. I mean, they were co-creating a myth from day one.
They were. And Carlos's part of the myth was heavily dependent on a wildly fabricated backstory.
Oh, right, the lies.
Right. He couldn't just be an anxious immigrant. He had to be a displaced aristocrat.
Because Margaret thought she had used her iron will to summon this aristocratic, mysterious Brazilian writer, because that's the story Carlos told everyone in Los Angeles.
Yeah, the Brazilian story.
He claimed he was born in Brazil. He said his father was an esteemed university professor. He painted this whole picture of being raised in a massive 52-room mansion, educated in a strict Buenos Aires boarding school.
It's so elaborate.
And he even claimed he was the nephew of Oswaldo Aranha.
Right.
And Oswaldo Aranha was a very famous, very real Brazilian diplomat. He actually served as president of the UN General Assembly.
It is a glittering, bulletproof fabrication. It instantly gives him prestige, immense wealth, and this tragic sense of displacement, as he claims he gave it all up to wander the world.
But the truth is a bit different.
The truth of his origins is entirely different. And ironically, the truth is infinitely more important to understanding his later success than the Brazilian lie ever was.
Yeah, because Carlos was not Brazilian. He was born Carlos Cesar Salvador Runyan Castaneda in Cajamarca, Peru on Christmas Day, 1926. And his father was not a glamorous academic or a diplomat. Cesar Runyan was a middle-class watchmaker and a goldsmith.
A life that Carlos actively despised.
Really? He hated it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He spent his youth trapped in his father's jewelry shop, watching the wealthy local women, the town women he derisively referred to as fat gorditas, coming in constantly to buy rings, bracelets, and trinkets.
So he just saw it as superficial.
Completely. To a young, ambitious Carlos, this shop was the ultimate trap. He saw these women as hopelessly entangled in superficial middle-class attachments, collecting useless, shiny metal while ignoring the deeper reality of existence.
He didn't want to be a craftsman churning out inventory for the local elite. He wanted to be a true artist.
Exactly.
But in his desperation to escape the mundane reality of his Peruvian life, he seemed to completely ignore the fact that his homeland was steeped in the exact kind of ancient magic he would later become world famous for.
That's the grand irony here. The real magical roots of Carlos Castaneda were literally right in his backyard in northern Peru.
The curanderos, right?
Yes. We are talking about the deeply entrenched tradition of the curanderos, the indigenous folk healers of the Andes.
Okay.
Just 50 miles west of his birthplace is the Chicama River Valley, where the ancient temple of the Brujos stands. You have the sacred healing lagoons of Las Huaringas high in the mountains. This wasn't hidden knowledge. It was part of the everyday fabric of his childhood.
I want to dig into the actual mechanics of what these curanderos were doing because it directly maps onto his later books.
It really does.
They weren't just, making herbal teas. They were utilizing a specific cactus they called San Pedro.
Yes. San Pedro is this tall, columnar cactus that is heavily laden with the psychoactive alkaloid mescaline.
Okay, mescaline.
The curanderos would harvest this cactus, slice it up like loaves of bread, and boil it down for hours into a highly potent, bitter infusion. And they drank this to enter what they described as the slipstream.
The slipstream. Let's explain the biology of that for a second for anyone listening who might not be familiar.
Please do.
When someone ingests mescaline, it binds to serotonin receptors in the brain, specifically the 5-HT2A receptors.
Right.
And this radically alters sensory perception, thought processes, and the brain's ability to filter external stimuli. It effectively forces the brain out of its default mode network.
Which is a massive shift.
Right. So when the curanderos talk about entering the slipstream, they're describing a profound neurochemical dissociative state where the boundaries between the self and the environment completely dissolve.
Yes.
And they use this state to diagnose illnesses, to supposedly communicate with spirits, and to step completely outside of ordinary consensus reality.
And the visual culture surrounding this practice was everywhere in Carlos's youth.
He couldn't escape it.
No, he couldn't. Before he came to the U.S., he studied art in Lima. He spent countless hours in the museums of archaeology, where he was intimately familiar with the art of the ancient Moche and Chavin cultures.
Okay.
He studied Chavin jugs, these ancient stirrup-handled clay vessels that literally depict jaguars alongside emerald green stalks of the San Pedro cactus.
Wow.
He saw terracotta friezes as shamans in mid-transformation. Even in the modern town squares, he grew up seeing local men selling magic plants and remedies in jelly jars.
That's fascinating.
He absorbed the entire structural framework of shamanism, the use of psychotropic plants, and the concept of a separate reality long before he ever set foot in Mexico or the American Southwest.
Knowing all this, I have to challenge a very common criticism of Castaneda.
Let's hear it.
A lot of critics point to his Brazilian lies and his fabricated timelines and say, see, he's a total fraud. It's all fake.
Right, that's a standard critique.
But even if he lied about being a Brazilian aristocrat, isn't it highly probable that he genuinely absorbed the ancient Peruvian traditions of his homeland?
Almost certain.
Right. Maybe he wasn't inventing a new religion from scratch. Maybe he was just translating Peruvian curanderismo into a Mexican setting to make it more palatable for an American audience.
That's a very fair point.
I mean, does shifting the geographic location of the knowledge inherently invalidate the knowledge itself?
That is a vital distinction to make. Calling him a pure fraud ignores the depth of his cultural immersion. A highly respected modern anthropologist, Douglas Sharon, actually pointed out that the teachings of Don Juan are remarkably similar to the actual verifiable practices of modern Peruvian curanderos.
Oh, wow, really?
Yes. Carlos absolutely possessed the vocabulary and the deep structural understanding of South American shamanism.
But he still lied.
He did. But to become the untouchable icon he eventually became, he felt he had to divorce himself entirely from his past. The teachings could survive, but Carlos, the watchmaker's son from Cajamarca, had to die.
And the catalyst for that death of his old identity wasn't some, mystical awakening on a mountaintop. It was a profound, devastating human trauma.
Yes.
The intense desire to distance himself from his mundane roots wasn't just about sounding cool at LA cocktail parties. It became the foundational bedrock of his entire spiritual philosophy.
It stems from 1949.
What happened then?
Carlos was in his early 20s, and his mother, Susana, died.
And reading the source text, it absolutely broke him.
It destroyed him.
He refused to attend the funeral. Instead, he locked himself in his room for 3 days without eating or speaking to anyone.
And during those 3 days in dark isolation, Carlos came to a radical, almost terrifying conclusion.
What was it?
He realized that his deep emotional dependency on his mother was a massive vulnerability. He saw love and attachment as a weakness that had ultimately caused him unbearable, paralyzing pain.
That's so incredibly sad.
It is. So when he finally unlocked that door and stepped out of that room, he resolved to ruthlessly break all human bonds. He decided that attachments to people, to places, to objects, even just the trinkets in his father's shop were traps designed to destroy you.
Wow. This is the crucial psychological pivot of his entire life, isn't it?
Absolutely. The grief is too much, so he amputates the capacity to grieve.
He just cuts it off.
He leaves home, he moves to Lima to study art, and eventually in 1951, he immigrates to the United States.
But America in the early 1950s isn't exactly a welcoming utopia for a short, aspiring artist from South America with a thick accent.
It is harsh. He faces severe self-doubt about his artistic talent, like he tries sculpting but feels he isn't good enough, and he faces blatant systemic racism.
We see this right in Margaret's own family.
Oh, her Aunt Velma.
Yeah, her Aunt Velma openly despised Carlos, explicitly calling him a dark foreigner and warning Margaret to stay away from him. He is constantly treated as inferior by the society he wants to conquer.
So how does a man who has already decided attachments are a weakness cope with a society that rejects him?
He lies.
He begins to systematically erase himself. He creates a dense fog around his identity through constant, elaborate, borderline pathological lies about his past.
And the lies he tells Margaret are incredibly cinematic.
Oh, they're straight out of a movie.
He tells her this highly detailed, gritty story about being in the army. He claims he was in the intelligence division. Sometimes he said he was deployed in Spain, other times Korea. He would constantly mix up the theater of war.
Classic liar trait.
Right. And he says his remote camp was attacked in the dead of night, his entire squad was brutally wiped out, and the enemy strung him upside down from a tree.
So dramatic.
It gets crazier. He claims he was stabbed repeatedly in the groin with a bayonet, left to bleed out in the mud, and eventually woke up spread-eagled on a cold stainless steel hospital bed, listening to doctors whisper that he wasn't going to make it.
And this is where the philosophy comes in.
Yeah, because he tells Margaret that it was in that precise moment, hovering on his supposed deathbed, that he had an epiphany. He decided to make every single minute of his remaining life count.
It is a phenomenal origin story. It casts him as a tragic, war-torn hero who has peered over the edge of the abyss.
Only one problem.
Right. The U.S. Defense Department has absolutely no record of Carlos Castaneda ever serving in the military in any capacity.
Of course not.
But the lie serves a vital purpose. If we look closely at his later books, this pathological lying is eventually reframed into profound mysticism.
How?
Well, in his writing, his fictional mentor Don Juan teaches Carlos a sacred spiritual technique called erasing personal history.
Oh, that's convenient.
Very. Don Juan tells him that having a concrete personal history makes you predictable. It anchors you to other people's expectations and thoughts.
So, by lying.
By constantly creating a fog around your past so no one knows who you truly are, you become a free, unpredictable, luminous being without boundaries.
It is the ultimate psychological transmutation. I mean, I want to compare this to something very modern so you listening can really grasp the mechanics of what he's doing here.
Please do.
This is exactly like a modern social media influencer meticulously curating a completely fake identity, renting mansions by the hour, taking photos in grounded private jets, projecting this flawless life of wealth.
Yes.
But when they eventually get exposed, instead of apologizing, they claim the fake account was actually a high-concept performance art piece meant to critique the ego.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right. Carlos takes his literal, real-world insecurities, his height, his paralyzing grief over his mother, his failure as a sculptor, the racism he endures, and he dresses them up as enlightenment.
He really does.
He even uses his father as a philosophical straw man. He tells Margaret how much he despises his father's average, routine-driven life. He is terrified of becoming a flatulent, boring academic, so he invents a philosophy where being boring is actually a spiritual failure.
He is doing exactly what your influencer analogy suggests, just with words instead of photos. He created a grand philosophy of non-attachment solely to protect himself from the very human pain of rejection and loss.
Wow.
He was erasing his personal history long before he ever conceived of the character of Don Juan. But to fully construct this myth, to take these deeply personal defense mechanisms and successfully market them as a global spiritual phenomenon, Carlos needed a very specific kind of incubator.
He needed the right environment.
Yes, he needed an environment that was historically primed to accept, validate, and elevate these exact ideas.
And he found the absolute perfect ecosystem in 1950s Los Angeles.
The occult stew.
Exactly. We have to really paint the picture of this specific era because it's not the LA we think of today. Post-war California was undergoing a massive suburban boom, but bubbling underneath that conformity was this explosive occult stew.
It was a weird time.
It was the golden boom time for EST research, mass UFO sightings, the rise of sci-fi B-movies, and a deep, burgeoning fascination with Eastern philosophy. This is the messy, vibrant birth of the New Age movement before it even had a marketing label.
The zeitgeist was shifting violently. You had serious academic researchers and bohemian poets rubbing shoulders, all desperate to find anything beyond the manufactured, sterile post-war American dream.
And Carlos Castaneda is swimming right in the middle of this current. We already talked about Neville Goddard and the I am concept, the idea that reality is merely a projection shaped by human imagination.
Right, Margaret's favorite.
Yeah, Margaret was constantly dragging Carlos to sit in the audience at Goddard's packed lectures at the Wilshire Ebell Theater. Goddard was telling thousands of people that they could literally dream a new reality into physical existence.
But Goddard was just one flavor of the occult stew. The real intellectual turning point for Carlos, the true catalyst that gave his ideas academic weight, was the British writer Aldous Huxley.
Yes, Aldous Huxley, universally famous as the author of Brave New World.
Exactly.
In 1954, Huxley published a short, groundbreaking book called The Doors of Perception, which detailed his personal clinical experiences taking mescaline.
And this book completely blew Carlos's mind. Carlos actually wrote a term paper extensively analyzing the book while he was a student at LA Community College.
So what was it about Huxley's book that hooked him so deeply?
What captivated Carlos was Huxley's central thesis, which heavily relied on the idea of the brain acting as a reducing valve.
Okay, let's explain how Huxley conceptualized this, because it becomes the backbone of Castaneda's later work.
Right. So Huxley argued that the universe is a cosmic firestorm of raw data and energy, an overwhelming, infinite reality that he called the mysterium tremendum.
The mysterium tremendum. Love that phrase.
That's great. But human beings cannot function in a firestorm. So through millions of years of evolution, our brains and nervous systems evolved to act as a reducing valve.
Like a filter.
Exactly like a filter. Our brains deliberately filter out 99% of that infinite reality, just so we can survive, find food, and cross the street without being paralyzed by the sheer awe of existence.
Yeah.
We only perceive a tiny, biologically useful trickle of reality.
Which makes perfect evolutionary sense. If you are staring in absolute awe at the vibrating quantum energy of a leaf, you are going to get eaten by a tiger.
Precisely. You'd be useless for survival.
Yeah.
But Huxley argued that psychedelic drugs, specifically mescaline, temporarily disable that reducing valve.
They knock the filter offline.
Yes, and when the filter drops, the mysterium tremendum floods in, allowing the user to experience the world as it truly infinitely is, rather than the biologically redacted version.
And this concept directly, and I mean word for word, directly shaped Carlos's later literary concepts of stopping the world and seeing reality rather than merely looking at it.
It's the exact same idea.
But Huxley wasn't the only academic playing with the fringes of reality. Everyone in Carlos and Margaret's social circle was reading Andrija Puharich's book, The Sacred Mushroom, which is about a Dutch sculptor who supposedly channeled an ancient Egyptian deity while high on mushrooms.
Right.
They were obsessed with the parapsychology research being done by J.B. Rhine, who was conducting rigorous ESP tests at Duke University. Carlos and Margaret actually spent months at her coffee table rigorously testing each other with homemade ESP cards, staring at the back of a card and trying to guess if the hidden shape was a circle, a square, or a star.
But if we look at why Huxley specifically was so incredibly important to Carlos personally, it goes beyond the reducing valve theory.
Oh.
Aldous Huxley was the physical embodiment of everything Carlos desperately wanted to be.
How so?
Huxley was an urbane, highly respected, classically educated gentleman scholar, yet here he was, actively dabbling in primitive magic and hardcore psychedelics without losing an ounce of his societal prestige.
Ah, he had it both ways.
Exactly. Carlos was terrified of becoming a boring, forgotten professor, but he desperately craved academic respectability and the authority it provided. Huxley proved you could successfully hold both. You could wear a sharp tweed suit to a faculty meeting and then go home and unlock the terrifying secrets of the universe.
Taking all of this LA occult history into account, I have to draw a conclusion here.
Let's hear it.
It sounds to me like Carlos didn't go down to the Mexican desert to find a new spiritual philosophy. He already had the complete philosophy.
Right.
He learned the mechanics of it in LA coffee shops, reading Huxley and listening to Godard. He went to the desert to find a mascot.
Mascot.
Yeah. He needed an exotic face to put on a very Western, California-born synthesis of ideas.
A mascot is a great way to put it. He needed a vessel to deliver the message. He had the academic theories from Huxley. He had the manifestation concepts from Goddard. He had the indigenous structural knowledge from his youth in Peru.
But none of that mattered if it sounded like it came from a sociology student.
Precisely. He needed an authentic, primal, undeniable voice to make the philosophy compelling to the masses.
But before he found that voice, he didn't just passively read about altering reality in his apartment. He started actively running these terrifying, highly manipulative psychological experiments on the people closest to him to prove he could bend the world to his will.
Yes.
Which brings us to the absolutely bizarre, chilling incident with Sue Childress.
This is the moment where the blurring of fact, fiction, and manipulation becomes genuinely dangerous.
So Carlos wants to make Margaret jealous. It's a standard, toxic, manipulative tactic in a relationship. So he completely invents a fake girl who was supposedly aggressively pursuing him in one of his university classes. But he doesn't just say, oh, a girl is flirting with me. He gives Margaret highly specific, granular details. He says her name is Sue Childress. He says she is blonde, about 5'7", has dark, piercing eyes, and, this is the incredibly specific part, she has a capped front left tooth.
He paints a vivid, hyper-realistic picture.
And Margaret, driven by that same iron will she used to summon Carlos to the phone months earlier, decides she is going to hunt this mysterious woman down.
She literally gets the phone book.
Yes. Margaret gets the massive Los Angeles phone book and relentlessly calls every single person named Sue Childress listed in it.
Which is wild.
Hour after hour, dialing numbers. Finally, she gets a woman on the line who admits she's a writer and agrees to meet. Margaret sets up a meeting at a local restaurant. She walks in, and she's completely dumbfounded.
Because of what she sees.
The real Sue Childress perfectly, flawlessly matches Carlos's description. She was blonde, she is exactly 5'7", she has dark eyes, and incredibly, she smiles and reveals a capped front incisor.
It appears to be the literal, physical manifestation of a character Carlos supposedly invented out of thin air.
When Margaret furiously confronts Carlos about this impossible coincidence, he swears up and down he had never met this woman before in his life. He acts genuinely deeply baffled.
But then he pivots.
Right. Instead of admitting it was a bizarre statistical anomaly or confessing that it was an elaborate prank, Carlos pivots. He uses this event as undeniable proof of a mystical phenomenon.
He turns it around on her.
He looks at Margaret and tells her that her sheer, intense force of will actually created this woman. He says, "You've created Sue Childress out of your mind."
And to push the manipulation even further, Carlos starts playing psychic pranks on this poor woman.
Oh, God, the phone calls.
Yeah. He calls the real Sue Childress's house. And while on the phone, he hears her mother hacking with a heavy smoker's cough in the background. Later, he tells Sue, using this ominous, mystic tone of voice, "Your mother is going to have serious throat trouble."
That's so creepy.
He takes basic, mundane auditory observation and weaponizes it to pretend he possesses clairvoyant powers.
I read that and I was genuinely disturbed. He is aggressively gaslighting these women, but what is the underlying philosophy here? How is he justifying this to himself?
To understand Carlos's justification, we have to look through the lens of academia again.
Okay.
Carlos was later deeply influenced by a UCLA professor named Harold Garfinkel. Garfinkel was a pioneer in a field of sociology called ethnomethodology, which leans heavily into phenomenology.
Phenomenology. Let me translate that into everyday terms for a second.
Go for it.
Phenomenology, in this context, argues that reality is not an objective, hard truth. Reality is merely a continuous social agreement.
Give me an example of that.
Think about a $20 bill. Objectively, scientifically, it is just a piece of green cotton blend with some ink on it. It has no intrinsic value.
Right.
But because all of society agrees it is worth $20, you can exchange it for actual food. The agreement creates the reality.
That's a great way to explain it. And Garfinkel applied this to human interaction. Carlos took this macro-sociological concept and weaponized it in his personal life.
In the Sue Childress situation.
Yes. Carlos and Margaret agreed Sue Childress into their narrative. They collectively built a localized reality where this mystical event occurred. Carlos even went so far as to sculpt a highly detailed terracotta bust of Sue, cementing her existence into their physical world.
And we know Carlos was a highly skilled sculptor from his time in Lima. He'd previously made a remarkable bust of his father. He is literally molding reality out of clay.
He really is.
I want to ask you, listening to this, to think about your own life. Have you ever experienced a coincidence so insane, so statistically impossible, that you almost had to invent a mystical or supernatural explanation just to process it?
It happens to a lot of people.
Because looking at the Sue Childress story, my immediate assumption is that Carlos absolutely was stalking this girl on campus, got caught in a lie, and then aggressively gaslit Margaret to cover his tracks.
That's the most logical answer.
But did he do it so well that he eventually started believing his own hype?
That is the central, unresolvable ambiguity of Carlos Castaneda's entire life. Did he genuinely believe he was tapping into the fabric of reality? Or was he just a brilliant, highly educated con artist who realized people wanted to be tricked?
Well, whatever his internal belief was, this unique ability to seamlessly blend fabricated details with real-world results was about to make him a very wealthy, very famous man in the halls of academia.
Oh, absolutely.
The groundwork is laid. Now, let's look at the actual genesis of his masterpiece, the creation of Don Juan Matus.
This is where elite academia meets desert alchemy.
So Carlos enrolls at UCLA to study anthropology. He signs up for a class called California Ethnography, taught by a highly respected academic named Professor Clement Mayan.
And Mayan had a very specific offer for his students.
He did. Professor Mayan has a standing, very difficult offer. He guarantees an automatic A on the final term paper to anyone who actually goes out into the field and interviews a real, living Native American informant.
Which is hard work.
Yeah, he knows this is grueling, uncomfortable work for college students, so he highly incentivizes it.
Most students naturally take the path of least resistance. They interview someone hanging around the campus, or they just write a standard library paper about historical pottery shards.
But Carlos actually gets in his car and heads out to the harsh deserts of the Southwest.
And remarkably, he actually finds someone.
Right. He tracks down an older Native American man who possesses ancient, highly esoteric, and incredibly specific knowledge about a plant called datura, also widely known as Jimson weed.
Yes, datura.
Carlos sits down with this man and records incredibly detailed, previously undocumented lore. He writes down the tribal concept of the datura plant having 4 distinct heads: the root, the stem, the leaves, and the flowers.
Very specific.
He records the nuanced difference between identifying male and female plants, and most importantly, the highly specific, dangerous ritual of digging up the toxic root using only a dry Palo Verde branch.
We really need to pause and explain why this Datura research was so mind-blowing to his professor.
Please do. Datura isn't just like a fun trip, right?
Oh, not at all. Datura is not a gentle psychedelic like psilocybin mushrooms. It is a wildly dangerous delirium containing powerful tropane alkaloids like scopolamine and atropine.
Sounds terrifying.
It doesn't just alter your perception. It induces true, terrifying hallucinations where you cannot distinguish between the drug and reality, often accompanied by severe physical side effects like hyperthermia and temporary blindness.
Wow.
It is incredibly easy to overdose and die from Datura. Because of this extreme danger, the tribal knowledge of how to properly harvest, prepare, and dose it was highly guarded.
So the Palo Verde branch thing.
Right. When Carlos brings back the detail about the dry Palo Verde branch, that isn't just a spooky ritual detail. Handling the bruised roots with bare skin can lead to transdermal absorption of the toxins. The branch is a safety mechanism wrapped in ritual.
That makes total sense. So when Carlos drops this paper on his desk, Professor Mayan is absolutely stunned.
He is.
He tells Carlos this is pure, untainted ethnobotanical knowledge that traditional anthropologists thought had died out 50 years ago. He immediately gives Carlos his A and strongly encourages him to expand the research and publish it.
It is an academic triumph.
Right.
And this exact term paper, word for word in some places, becomes the foundational bedrock for his first massive bestseller, The Teachings of Don Juan.
But here is the massive, glaring problem.
The timeline.
Yes, the timeline. When historians and critics started looking closely at Carlos's academic records, the entire timeline collapses. There's a massive chronological flaw in the Castaneda mythos.
A huge one. The paper Carlos submitted to Professor Mayan, the one containing all this brilliant secret Datura knowledge, was written, graded, and filed away before the day Carlos later claimed in his books that Don Juan first introduced him to the drug.
I mean, that's the smoking gun right there. He already possessed the secret knowledge before he supposedly met the all-knowing master who taught it to him.
Exactly.
So if Don Juan didn't teach him this, who the heck is Don Juan Matus?
This is where we see Carlos's true genius for creating composite characters.
Okay, tell me about that.
Professor Mayan later noted that Carlos's original Datura informant out in the desert wasn't a traditional, pure tribal elder. He was more of an intellectual outlier, a man who had moved between different groups and collected varied knowledge.
So he took this guy.
It is highly probable, almost certain, that Carlos took the raw data from this real-life Datura informant and fused him with other elements to create a more compelling narrative figure.
He builds a Frankenstein's monster of a guru.
Exactly. He mixes in the physical description, the earthy humor, and the specific speech patterns of his own Italian grandfather.
The Italian grandfather.
Yes. He layers on the structural framework of the Peruvian curanderos he observed in his youth in Cajamarca. And then, the absolute masterstroke. He peppers Don Juan's dialogue with profound, complex quotes, lifted directly from the European philosophers he was actively studying at UCLA, like Edmund Husserl and Ludwig Wittgenstein.
That is hilarious and brilliant. He literally has an uneducated Yaqui Indian sorcerer delivering blistering critiques of Wittgenstein's language theories while sitting in the dirt in the Sonoran Desert.
Is incredible.
And what about the actual drug experiences in the book? Carlos writes this incredibly vivid, terrifying scene where he claims to have rubbed a Datura paste all over his body, which caused him to literally fly through the air. Did he actually experience that?
We know from his contemporaries that he likely didn't invent that concept either.
Where did it come from?
Carlos got the idea to investigate Datura flying ointments from a fellow anthropologist friend, Mike Harner. Harner had been researching medieval European witches and the nightshade paste they used to induce flying sensations.
Oh, wow.
Harner specifically asked Carlos to look into whether Native American tribes had a similar transdermal practice. Suddenly, shortly after that conversation, Carlos is writing a first-person, harrowing account of doing exactly that.
It is an absolute masterclass in narrative synthesis. He takes factual folklore, academic theory, casual conversations with friends, and his own intense imagination, and binds them all together into this singular, omniscient, unforgettable character of Don Juan.
He really did.
But I want to push back on the cynicism for a moment.
Okay, sure.
If the dates are faked, if the quotes are plagiarized from dead European philosophers, if the famous flying scene was essentially a buddy's research prompt, Does it inherently invalidate the spiritual truths contained in the books?
That is the big debate.
Can a fictional character still be a profound spiritual teacher? Because we can't ignore the fact that millions of people read these books and felt genuinely, life-alteringly enlightened.
You've hit on the grand paradox of Castaneda. The teachings themselves, the concepts of stopping your internal dialogue, of facing the primal fear of death, of aggressively breaking your daily routines to see the world anew, they are philosophically incredibly robust.
Yeah, they work.
They beautifully echo the core tenets of Zen Buddhism, Stoicism, and the phenomenology we discussed earlier. The vessel Don Juan may have been heavily fabricated, but the psychological impact on the reader, the paradigm shift it caused in their minds, was entirely provably real.
But here is the tragic irony. While Carlos was successfully merging academia and mysticism out in the desert, becoming this global spiritual icon who taught millions how to live freely, his actual real-world domestic life was completely collapsing into a bizarre, heartbreaking tragicomedy.
This is where we see the intense collateral damage of a man trying to literally erase his personal history.
Carlos and Margaret's marriage was chaotic from the start. They actually got married spontaneously in Tijuana in January 1960.
And the motivation wasn't romance.
No, it was intense jealousy. Margaret had a date planned with a wealthy businessman named Farid. Carlos essentially crashes the date, aggressively kicks Farid out, and drags Margaret across the border to get married that very night.
Which is so unhinged.
And we know this isn't a myth. The source text includes the official marriage document from the Mexican state of Morelos, proving it happened.
And once they're married, their life together in that apartment is constantly steeped in this strange, unsettling, occult atmosphere.
There's an incredibly eerie detail described in the source text. It's a photograph taken inside Margaret's apartment.
Oh, the mirror photo.
Yeah, Margaret is looking in the mirror, but where Carlos is standing, the man who is physically holding the camera taking the photo, there is no body.
Just a light.
There is just a luminous head of light reflecting back in the glass. What's crazy is that it looks exactly like the abstract, glowing cover art for his later wildly famous book, A Separate Reality. It's spooky, and it reinforces this idea that Carlos is dissolving his physical presence.
But the reality of a marriage requires physical presence. It requires emotional commitment. And Carlos is constantly disappearing, vanishing for weeks at a time to the desert, or at least claiming he was in the desert, supposedly conducting his research.
Margaret finally reaches her breaking point. She demands a divorce.
Understandably.
So Carlos, playing the role of the accommodating husband, drives her back down to Tijuana. They go into a Mexican official's office, sign a bunch of legal-looking papers, and Margaret drives back to L.A. thinking she is a free woman.
She thinks it's over.
She moves on with her life. She meets a man named Adrian Garretson, falls in love, marries him, and they have a baby boy named Carlton Jeremy, or CJ.
And that is when Carlos springs the trap.
Carlos reappears in Los Angeles and drops a nuclear bomb on Margaret's life. He casually reveals that the Tijuana divorce was entirely fake.
He faked the whole thing.
It was a charade with a fake official. They are, in the eyes of the law, still legally married. Therefore, her new marriage to Adrian is completely invalid.
It's so manipulative.
And then the psychological manipulation reaches a staggering new level. Carlos looks at this blonde, blue-eyed baby, CJ, and claims that the child is his own biological son.
Despite looking nothing like him.
He tells people the blonde hair is just recessive genes, and he actively goes around the UCLA campus telling his academic colleagues that he has a son, but that the mother is some unnamed Scandinavian woman, completely erasing Margaret's existence from the narrative.
He literally absorbs the child into his own mythos. He embraces CJ as his spiritual son, affectionately calling him his chocho.
And he doesn't just claim the kid, he uses him for literary material.
Oh, this part is wild.
There is a deeply unsettling story in the memoir where a 2-year-old CJ is playing outside, points up at the sky, and says something to the effect of, "Look at the sun, it's old and weak. Tomorrow morning it will be young and beautiful."
Right.
It's a very cute, slightly poetic thing a toddler might randomly say, but Carlos hears it, steals it, and literally puts that exact quote into the mouth of the ancient sorcerer Don Juan in his 3rd book, Journey to Ixtlan.
He frames a toddler's babble as profound, ancient sorcerer's wisdom about reading the omens of the earth.
The audacity is astounding. But if we analyze this through the lens of Carlos's overarching philosophy, we uncover the ultimate heartbreaking tragedy of his worldview.
Yes, the tragedy of non-attachment.
In the books, Don Juan repeatedly tells Carlos that to become a true man of power, a sorcerer must ruthlessly break all human attachments. He must erase his personal history so completely that he is tied to nothing and no one.
And in the real world, Carlos applies this philosophy with devastating results.
He really does.
He has to abandon the domestic life he actually seems to deeply crave. He has to abandon Margaret. He has to abandon CJ because being a father means making promises. It means being tied to a daily routine. It means having a concrete, undeniable personal history.
I think the tragedy here is so profound. Carlos treats human relationships like a digital simulation. He treats people like a video game where he thinks he can just delete the save file whenever the emotional stakes get too high or he feels vulnerable.
Exactly.
He gets scared of the intimacy, so he just unplugs the console and resets. But you cannot do that to a living, breathing child. You cannot just erase a human being because your cobbled-together philosophy demands non-attachment.
He successfully escaped his past. He escaped his marriage, his mundane Peruvian identity, and his insecurities. But the cost was immense. He traded genuine, messy, beautiful human connection for total, sterile isolation inside a myth of his own making.
So when we step back and look at the totality of this deep dive, what do we make of Carlos Castaneda?
Just a lot to process.
He took the ancient, potent shamanic practices of his native Peru. He mixed them with the psychedelic, bohemian, boundary-pushing energy of 1950s Los Angeles, and he fueled it all with his own profound, desperate psychological need to reinvent himself. And he distilled all of those elements into the unforgettable character of Don Juan.
Margaret's memoir actually opens with a short epigraph poem that I think perfectly, flawlessly encapsulates the man she loved and lost to the myth.
What does it say?
It reads, "Don't write in stone or write in wood that I was honest or that I was good, but write in smoke on a passing breeze. He lived, he laughed, and he understood."
Wow.
Carlos Castaneda was not an honest man, but he did profoundly understand the desperate, universal human need for magic in a mundane world.
And that leaves you, listening to this, with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
If millions of people read the Don Juan books, and because of the words on those pages, they changed their lives, faced their deep-breath fears, and found genuine, lasting spiritual awakening, does it actually matter if Don Juan was real?
That's the real question.
If a meticulously crafted lie completely and permanently alters reality for the better, at what point does the lie actually become the truth? Think about that terrified man standing barefoot in the desert dawn, waiting for the ally as the crow flies overhead. It may have just been a nightmare in a Westwood bedroom, but for millions of readers across the globe, that desert was the most real place on earth.
It is the ultimate social agreement of reality.
Until next time, keep diving deep into the sources.